He had once hidden in a pile of garbage for 3 days in order to kill a man. That job had been completed during a summer in Amir. It had been miserably hot, and insects feasted on him continuously. Stinking of filth, badly dehydrated, sunburned and sick, he had still made the 200-yard shot on demand the instant his target had showed his head. 1 round, nice and clean. That job had been preferable to this one. For 2 days and 2 nights now he had hidden, watching the blank white of a high mountain pass. He was chilled to the bone, but couldn't light a fire for risk of being seen. It must have been because of the unrelenting cold that he found himself thinking wistfully of that desert. The northern woods of Kador had never been intended for man. Fools lived there simply because they were too stupid to leave and too stubborn to die. He had come all this way to put a bullet into a particular one of those stubborn fools. Some folks call him a mercenary, others a hired gun. Most would argue that he was nothing more than an assassin. Regardless of their opinion of how he earned his coin, everyone knew Kell Bailoch was the finest rifleman in Western Imran. Give him a clean shot, and the gods themselves couldn't save you. The hard part was the waiting. The sniper let his mind wander. He had spotted them coming long before they saw him. Picking his potential employer out from the crowd had been easy. The hooded woman walked between 2 men with long cloaks. The common folks were deferential and moved quickly out of the woman's path. The 2 men were trained killers, and they couldn't help but act like it, with wary eyes constantly shifting as they scanned the busy marketplace. Their predatory nature made them stand out amongst the shoppers. Kell Bailoch preferred to blend in. It made his job easier. He kept his wide-brimmed hat low over his eyes and covered the lower half of his face with a scarf, masking his Signarin features. He stepped from the shadows and followed the 3 discreetly for a time. The gently falling snow barely shifted the merchants' enthusiasms as they loudly hawked their wares. Fall in northern Kador was like winter in any other kingdom. Once he was certain that this wasn't an elaborate trap and they were isolated from potential eavesdroppers, Bailoch walked behind the Kayazy's guards and waited to be noticed. It didn't take long. The first bodyguard turned, his hand inside his cloak, and surely resting on a long dagger. The second moved immediately in front of the woman. They were quick, but he noted that neither of them looked towards the rooftops. Sloppy. "What do you want?" the first guard demanded. "I wish to speak with Mistress Patron for a job," Bailoch answered. His Kadoran was unaccented, as bland as his appearance. "I was informed she was looking for me." The woman turned, giving him a glimpse of pale skin and blue eyes beneath the hood. She was rather young for the leader of a ruthless trade organization. "You are the one I was told about?" she asked. Bailoch tipped his hat. The survivors of Talon Company could always be counted on for referrals. "You're shorter than I expected," she appraised him. "Are you as good as they say?" "Are you as rich as they say?" She nodded. "Then I'm good enough." It was just another job, though colder than most. There had been so many jobs over the years that begun to run together. Half up front, find a way to reach the target, take the shot, collect the remainder. Sometimes that meant investigation, preparation, disguises, infiltration, and cover identities. Other times it meant good field craft or an elevated position and some patience. In the end, it was all the same. Get a line of sight and let silence work. When he had been a 16-year-old long gunner recruit, a marksman instructor gave him the most important bit of advice in his entire life. The bullet wanted to hit the target. That was its destiny. It was the shooter's weakness that stood in the way. Shifting to keep the circulation flowing in his extremities, he checked the pass again. The target would have to come through it eventually. He was certain that approaching the isolated and fortified cabin of a paranoid master rifleman would have been a stupid move. Staking out this position was the surer but far more uncomfortable method to get a shot. In most of western Imran, this would have already been considered a harsh winter, but to the rugged Kassites of the Skarsfeld, the real snows have yet to begun to fall. The target was a hunter who would be looking for game as long as possible in anticipation of the long winter, and when he did, he would pass through here, ready to hunt. Bailoch knew that feeling very well. Savasha Padoran stood next to the roaring fireplace, staring into the flames. Bailoch's earlier assumption had been correct. She was young, 20 at the most, and more than likely too inexperienced for this line of work. He had been informed that her father and older brothers had recently been murdered, casualties in the constant struggle between the factions of the Cadoran underworld. The political nuances were difficult for a foreigner to grasp, but it was a constant source of work. Surely it had been a surprise when the family business had fallen on her. Bailoch doubted she would survive long in the cutthroat butchery that passed for Kayazy business, but until then her gold would spin as well as any others. They were alone inside of one of the dozens of anonymous properties she owned around the city. The bodyguards waited outside. That told Bailoch that this was something she wished to be dealt with as discreetly as possible. "Your target is a horrible man. He used to work for my father. We were very close once, but I want him dead for what he did to my family. He is a beast, a killer." She was slight, but he had heard steel in her voice. "A year ago he betrayed my family. My father trusted this man, treated him like a brother. Then he turned on us and gave our most vital secrets to competitors. My brother was murdered because of him. For such treachery there can be no..." Bailoch held up one hand. "You don't need to explain yourself to me." She looked up from the fire, surprised. "You do not care what evil he has done?" "The bullet doesn't care. Why should I?" Savasha stopped. He had put her off balance. It was apparent that he had already thought that what she was going to say to her hired assassin, as if she needed to justify her decision. "Very well. His name is Malko Varki." "You got local hires? Why do you need me?" "You are not the first I've hired to do this work. He has killed all I've sent before. Varki is a Kossite, winter-born in the deepest wilds of the Vardanskiska, where the tribes still live by the old ways. He is one with the woods, as alert as the wolves he used to hunt for a living. Since he has wronged my family, he's been living in the forest, where no one can catch him unawares. And he is one of the finest shots in the motherland." "That won't be a problem." She paused for a long time. "He is gifted. I do not know the particulars, as they were a guarded secret, but my father said he was once served with the Grey Lord Covenant." "An arcanist." Magic had a way of making jobs complicated. "My fee just went up." "Whatever is necessary. I cannot rest until I know Malko Varki is dead." For some reason he found himself taking pity on the girl. A rare thing indeed. "A word of advice. I've been doing this a long time. People die. Sometimes you're the one to kill them. Sometimes you need someone else to do it for you. No shame in that. You don't need to share your reasons. Giving the order is the same as pulling the trigger. It just takes will." "I have the will," she snapped. Perhaps she'd last longer than you first thought. "Good. That and 10,000 gold kotinas will put this man in the ground." The thick furs he brought kept his body heat-trapped. He'd also purchased a compact device from an alchemist in Korsk that produced a small measure of warmth for a few hours each time its capacitor was wound. It kept his extremities from freezing off during the nights. The device had cost quite a bit, but it was worth it in the end. Frostbite in his trigger finger could ruin everything. He allowed himself sleep in short naps. It was a risk that he had to take, as there was no one to share the watch, and no way of knowing when the target would try to cross the pass. The wolves and bears of the Skarsfeld would more than likely avoid the smell of human waste and gun oil. There were other, far more dangerous and unnatural predators in these woods, but they were rare, and he was a light sleeper. In his dreams, Bailoch saw ballistic calculations, wind speed, and trajectories, but never the faces of the hundreds he had killed. The cold grew deepest a few hours just before dawn. When he raised his head and the bearskin lifted, icy air shocked him fully awake. Bailoch immediately scanned the snow below, looking for any fresh disturbances in the perfect white expanse. The snow was so reflective that even a bit of the moonlight enabled him to see that there was nothing larger than a few animal tracks. It was exactly as he remembered it, and he had memorized every detail of this terrain. He shook a fresh inch of snow from atop the firs. The shivering came next. It would pass. Bailoch wasn't worried about uncomfortable shaking causing him to miss. Only rookies try to hold perfectly still while shooting. Everyone shook to some degree anyway. Breathing, muscle tremors, even a heartbeat could cause the sights to move. Making a difficult shot was all about knowing your body's rhythms and firing at the correct time. An experienced rifleman didn't try to hold his breath. That only increased the tremors. The key was to shoot on the respiratory pause. Inhale, exhale, squeeze, bang. Only there was no bang with silence. There was no click of the hammer being cocked, no snap of the firing pin, and certainly no alchemic roar as the blasting powder components met. His rifle was cloaked in magic that rendered it totally silent. The only noise was the buzz of the passing bullet, which anyone who has ever been shot could tell you sounded like angry bees, and the impact, which sounded rather like hitting a melon with a club. After scanning the pass, Bailoch checked the rifle. Moisture tended to condense on the blued steel during the night, and he carefully wiped down the outside with an oiled cloth. Dexar Serac himself had enchanted silence years ago, and to this day Bailoch had no clue if the enchantment would keep his rifle from rusting. He'd never taken the chance to find out. A rifleman took good care of his body, and even better care of his rifle. Bailoch moved slowly as he worked the cloth into every mechanical nook. Big movements would attract the eye of anyone who was hunting him. He opened Silence's action, and then removed the heavy paper-cased round from the chamber, took out his cleaning rod, and gave the barrel a quick pass to make sure no moisture had condensed and frozen in the rifling during the night. You always clean from the breech, never the muzzle. Cleaning from the muzzle could scratch the crown, and that could affect accuracy. He'd earned a reputation for being deadly, and he knew it wasn't just because he was just talented. It was because he was methodical. The world had a lot of talented snipers, but few lived as long as he did. The oiled cloth rubbed in the magic runes engraved on the barrel, and Bailoch paused. Once long ago, a name had been carved there. It belonged to a woman who he had known, but she was gone, scrubbed from his mind just as her name had been scrubbed from the steel. The sniper dismissed the thought and returned to his weapon maintenance. The scope rings were secure. The screws were tight. He rechecked the chamber. Clear. And then pulled the trigger to a dry fire. On a normal rifle, he would have been able to listen to the metallic ring of the firing pin, but it was impossible with silence. Bailoch was so familiar with this rifle that he operated entirely by feel, and everything felt just as it should. When the job was through, he would reward himself with a proper detailed strip and deep cleaning on Silence's action. He checked the round of ammunition before reloading. Bailoch only used the best components. The special paper casing was free of blemish or tarnish. The soft lead bullet was jacketed with a thin coat of copper, which kept his rifling from fouling nearly as quickly. Less fouling meant more accurate shooting should he find himself in a protracted engagement. Bailoch couldn't see it, and he certainly was no golden crucible alchemist, but he knew that the casing held 2 special sealed bags, each filled with an alchemic solution. When these bags were pierced with the firing pin and the solutions intermingled, they would ignite instantly and burn fast. That would create a growing gas pressure. It was the miracle of blasting powder, the wonder of the modern age. Seeking the path of least resistance, the expanding gases would shove the bullet down the barrel at great speed, and, if he was doing what he was supposed to do, right into the target. The still burning blasting powder entered the atmosphere was the cause of muzzle blasts, only that wasn't an issue with Silence's enchantments. That made getting away or making another shot without getting killed much easier for him. Bailoch may not have understood the magic behind alchemy, but putting bullets into things was what he was born to do. There was a limit on how much pressure blasting powder could create inside of a firearm and how fast it would hurl a projectile. The day alchemists figured out how to make it push a bullet faster was the day Kell Bailoch became far more dangerous. Gravity was a jealous constant that limited his range. Wind could push his speeding projectile off course. In a mountain valley like this, it could be gusting in 2 different directions across the distance. When the time came, he would only have seconds to judge the distance and the wind, adjust his hold, and take the shot. Silence checked, cleaned, and reloaded, Bailoch finally tended to his own physical needs. After relieving himself, taking a swig from his own canteen, and gnawing on some oak jerky, the sniper went back to his frozen vigil as the sun came up. In the distance, a lone figure approached, trudging through the snow. It was time. Savasha Perdoran poured him a drink, and then poured one for herself. "To a successful hunt." Bailoch ignored the glass she set in front of him and reached out for the other one. A clever assassin would poison the glass rather than the drink. He took the tumbler and eyed the clear liquid suspiciously. "You are a paranoid man, Bailoch." Savasha smiled, took the glass originally intended for him, and pounded down the drink in one gulp. She grimaced, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Some of my father's finest vodka. It is older than I am." He gave her an appreciative nod. "To a successful hunt." The favorite drink of the Khadorans, made from fermented potatoes, could be used to strip the paint off a warjack. It burnt going down and then sat like a fiery lump in his stomach, making him sweat. You could see why the people of the frozen north liked the stuff. She took the bottle and poured another few fingers of the potent liquid. He had already gotten the first half of his fee up front and felt fairly certain he wasn't being set up. So the sniper took the glass, thought he would pace himself in these unfamiliar surroundings. Despite her size and age, Savasha seemed capable of keeping her wits despite the strong drink, but that was expected of a Khadoran. She gulped down the second and poured herself a third. "I must tell you, Bailoch, I've dreamed of that one-eyed bastard's death. Since his betrayal, I feared he may someday decide to return and meddle in my family's business again. This worry has gnawed at me."
"What's more important, the revenge or protecting your business?"
"In Khador, revenge is business. I'd want Raki to suffer." Bailoch took another sip.
"Well, if all goes well, he won't."
She eyed him frankly. "There are many stories about you."
"I'd wager most of them aren't true."
"Even if a fraction of them are, though, I must ask." Savasha paused. "Why?"
Bailoch leaned back in his chair and took another sip. "Why what?"
"Why do you do this? You have been doing it for a long time, no? How long has it been?"
"That I've been shooting people for money."
He'd enlisted in the Signarin army as a long gunner at 16. Then he joined the Talon Company, and that had been fun while it lasted, until they were branded war criminals. He'd been freelance ever since, drifting from war to war and taking on various jobs.
"I don't know. Come up on 30 years, I guess."
"You must be wealthy now." Savasha nodded at the sack of gold coins at the table between them. "You command a substantial fee." He reached over and hefted the bag, as if he could tell the value of the coins just by weight. Bailoch had made fortunes and lost them. Gold was necessary to live, but he was prepared to leave it behind without hesitation in order to get out of a situation alive. He dropped the sack back on the table.
"Man's gotta work. I learn what I can until I run into someone better than me and I die."
Savasha chuckled. "Why, you are an amoral, pragmatic fatalist. Are you sure you've not got Khadoran blood?" He shook her head, already more serious than normal. "I understand. I am Kayazy. My family rose from peasants to businessmen with the power of nobles because our hard work and cunning. And now that business is mine to protect. I did not ask for this life, but when my family were butchered like pigs, this became my life. I had no choice. She finished her third drink. Earn what you can until you lose to someone better. I like that.
Bailoch shrugged. It wasn't often he pondered philosophy with an employer.
The approaching figure was humanoid, dressed in furs and approximately 500 yards away. Drifts weren't deep enough yet to call for snowshoes, but the footing along the narrow, rocky pass still had to be slippery. Regardless, the figure was moving quickly and confidently along the tall rock wall. Lying prone in his insulated furs and the water-resistant leather armor he wore, Bailoch slowly removed the canvas lens cover from his telescopic sight and moved into his shooting position. Silence's handguard rested gently on the top of a falling log. He never let the barrel rest against anything, as extra pressure from hand or rest could change the tension of the barrel and affect accuracy. The steel butt plate he had set firmly against his shoulder. His cheek rested on the stock. The cold glass of the telescopic sight had been coated with a special alchemical mixture to keep it from fogging up once it was only an inch from the warmth of his face. The magnifying scope seemed to enlarge everything a dramatic 7 times, but it offered an extremely narrow field of vision. It was like trying to look down a long, dark pipe to find a pinhole of light at the end. An inexperienced shooter with an inconsistent cheek position would have to fumble about to find what he was looking for. Bailoch found his potential target instantly. The figure turned out to be a human male with a thick black beard. Long, dark black hair hung from beneath his fur hat. Sadly, that description could fit pretty much any of the Cadorn's northern population, and Bailoch wasn't paid 10,000 coltinas to murder some random hunter. The optical quality wasn't sufficient enough to allow him to pick out any of Malko Varki's distinguishing features at this range. He settled in to wait for the man to get closer. His finger would remain indexed outside the trigger guard until he was ready to fire. But the simple wire crosshairs continued to bounce back and forth across his view of the Cadorn's chest. 400 yards. The man was making good time. Fit and strong, the sure-footed woodsman moved quickly from rock to rock, avoiding the wide white spots that could be concealing crevices. He looked to be somewhere in his 40s. They were about the same age. The man was dressed like a Kayazy in gray and black furs and carried a long rifle slung over one shoulder. 300 yards. The Kayazy paused on top of a jutting stone lip to survey the rest of the pass. He was wary. As he turned his head to the side, Bailoch confirmed that he wore a black eye patch over his left eye. That matched Savash's description of the target. If there was another Kayazy hermit in the area with one eye, he was about to have a very bad day. Satisfied with the pass was clear, Malko Varki hopped down from the rock and continued at his swift pace. Bailoch could easily take the shot now. The sun had peeked over the mountainside, and with the light-amplifying properties of his telescopic sight, he could see clearly enough. The wind was strong, though. He glanced at the pine trees around him, watching how the branches rippled. Then he looked back across the pass, watching the patterns and eddies of the surface of the snow. 5 miles eastward to his position, with gusts 10 miles an hour across the clearing to the west. Nothing he couldn't compensate for. 250 yards. Silence was one of the most accurate firearms in Western Imran, and Bailoch was one of the best shots. He was deadly with the most cumbersome of blunderbusses. A precision instrument like this simply increased his potential. His rifle was a magical marvel, capable of shooting a 2-inch group into a 100-yard target. He could take Varki from here, but held on, having memorized the layout of every rock, bit of plant life, and patch of ice on the pass. The Kayazy was moving between some tall rocks, which would provide him with easy cover in the case of a miss. Bailoch picked another spot, mostly open snow atop grass, with no real cover for 10 yards in either direction, and a 200-foot tall icicle-covered rock wall as a backstop. If he missed, he'd still have time to get off a follow-up shot. Ever so slowly, Bailoch moved his right hand to his mouth and pulled the leather glove off of his fingers with his teeth. Then he returned his hand to the firing position of Cyrus's stock. It was ice cold to the touch. The sniper shifted his body slightly so as to not put so much pressure on his chest. His breathing was slow and easy. 200 yards. Marco Valky walked into the chosen clearing. Bailoch pressed the pad of his finger to the trigger. Half a pound of pressure is all it would take. The crosshairs were no longer on the man, but above and ahead of him. It took time for a bullet to travel through the air, so you had to lead the target, allow the bullet to intersect with it. Bailoch automatically and instinctively adjusted for the wind and elevation as Silence's muzzle tracked just ahead of Varky's path. 190. Malco Varky froze in place. Bailoch did the same. At this range, the Kassite's frown was clearly visible through the 7-power magnification. Somehow he knew something was wrong. A sound, a smell, it didn't matter. Something was off, and that meant danger. Varky turned, lips moving. There was a shimmer in the glass of the scope as glowing runes formed around the Arcanist's hand. Bailoch pulled the trigger. All the snow in the clearing exploded upward. Silence made no sound, but the recoil still thumped his shoulder, and the scope lifted. A wall of icy wind crashed down the canyon, blowing snow and dirt everywhere and obscuring the target. Cursed magic! Bailoch calmly broke open the action and began extracting the ashen paper debris. He shoved another round into the chamber and closed the breach. Now, where are you? The wind died off, and most of the snow fell back to the ground. There was no sign of Varky. Now came the tricky part. If he'd run, Bailoch would have a shot, which meant Varky wouldn't run. He'd take cover. If he had taken cover, he'd have his own rifle out, and he'd be searching for his attacker. The first one to bolt would be seen and would die. Careful only to move his eyes, Bailoch searched the pass. If he were a Kassite with ice magic, where would he go? The simmering of the magic runes drew his attention. Not in the open, Varky was far too clever for that, but Bailoch caught the reflection of a sheet of ice hanging above. He tracked it back and found the rocks Varky was hiding behind. Damn! He didn't have a shot, and the Kassite was casting a spell. Energy cracked in the air. Suddenly, the world turned white, and an unbelievable cold struck his flesh. It was as if he was been plunged into the heart of the blizzard that was trying to rip the life right out of his body. He needed a new angle to get a shot around those rocks. There was no time for hesitation. His body didn't want to respond, but Bailoch leapt up and staggered through the hammering wind. Despite the magic attack, he felt calm. He would either die or he would win. Fretting about it seemed pointless. His hiding place was elevated, but a good sniper always had an escape route, and he forced himself towards the side of the bluff. It was a 10-foot drop, and he hit hard and rolled through the snow, careful not to let his precious silence strike the ground. The compact blizzard above him tore his hiding spot to bits. Gasping for breath, he realized it was clear here, and that meant Varky had a shot. Bailoch scrambled for cover. The Kassite's rifle bullet tore bark from a nearby tree and pelted him with splinters, but then Bailoch was running through the trees. The lingering magical cold made thinking difficult, but he knew Varky would be moving too, and he'd be looking for another shot, because that's what Bailoch would do in this situation. He went low, hugging the ground, crawling through the dead underbrush. Bailoch pulled up alongside a thick tree and scanned, but Varky was already well hiding. He had left his glove in the blizzard. His right hand was bright pink and quivering uncontrollably. Dealing with frostbite could wait, he thought. He had a sorcerer to kill. If Varky didn't get a shot, he'd use more magic to flush out his quarry. That meant time was on Varky's side. Bailoch had to push him. Get the Kassite to reveal himself, and he had to do it fast. He sank back down, deep behind cover, and shrugged out of the heavy bearskin. Now the cold really hit. And if he sank back down, deep beneath cover, and struggled out of his heavy bearskin coat. Now the cold really hit. But if this worked, he'd be able to put it back on in a moment. And if it didn't, well, either way, he wouldn't be cold for long. He found a sturdy stick, placed the furs over it, and then shoved it past the side of the tree. A second later, the Kassite spotted the movement of the fur and fired. The bullet pierced the skin. Bailoch spotted the flash in the smoke before he heard the gunshot. He moved the stick, letting the coat sway, and then hurled it out of the trees and down the cliffside. Varkey reloaded as he came around the boulder at the base of the cliffs. Runes of magic power were swirling about his body, ready to finish off his wounded attacker. Unaware that he was chasing empty fur, he realized his mistake as his muzzle poked past the tree. He prepared a defensive spell, and snow and wind erupted outward, strong enough to deflect a bullet. He wasn't about to fall for the same trick twice. The crosshair danced across the icy sheets of the cliff, far above Varkey's head. Over 2 days, Bailoch had memorized every nuance of the surface. The sniper picked out an icicle big enough to cause a shower of debris, but thin enough to be easily broken by a single heavy round. His heart hammered, but he only felt cold so deep it burned. His breath shot out in painful clouds of steam. He was in an awkward, improvised position. It would have been extremely difficult to shot on a nice day in the sun. Bullet wants to hit the target. That's its destiny. It's the shooter's weakness that stands in the way. Kell Bailoch was a consummate professional, and he wasn't about to thwart the bullet's destiny. Adjusted for distance, compensated for wind. The crosshair shook across the surface of the icicle. Hold over. Exhale. Squeeze. Silence made no noise as the recoil thumped his shoulder. The icicle broke free and spun downward into a suspended sheet of ice. It shattered, taking snow and rock with it, and all fell in an ever-growing cascade of destruction. Marco Varkey's ice storm died off, just in time for him to look up into the rushing thunder. The young, reluctant leader of a Kayazy faction poured him one last drink. He'd had too much, but the fire was nice, the room was warm, the chair was comfortable, and it had been a long time since he enjoyed the company of a beautiful young woman. Is that all there is to it, then, Bailoch? Survival, money, power? Is that all there is in life? Savasha was a little drunk herself. We do a good job that makes us important and vital. And maybe we're good enough at it that we'll get to live longer, yes? Is that it? You kill people over and over and over again. You've assassinated generals and politicians and priests. So many. For so long.
It's what I do.
But why? I'm stuck. You are not. One job, that much gold, you could walk away. Be a farmer or a gunsmith or something. You could choose another path. Why this one?
That was a good question.
Malko Varkey had been struck by the rock slide. His legs were crushed. He was bleeding from a gash in his head that had opened clear to his skull. His beard was soaked red and he was coughing up blood. The sniper limped up to the fallen man. He'd retrieved his coat and had silence cradled in his arms. His job was almost done. The Kayazy looked up, confused, when he didn't recognize the man who had ended his life.
Why, you...
Kell Bailoch brought silence up to finish the job.
Because I'm the best.